Greetings, everyone. People of Door Hosier, please come in, have a seat, have your lunch. Look forward to a feast both for the body and the mind over these next 50 minutes as we have a wonderful panel on a theme that's been of great importance to the Aspen Ideas Festival through its history, and I think is of particular urgency right now, which is Reinventing Cities. We have three excellent practitioners here. My name is James Fallows. I'm a writer for The Atlantic magazine, a longtime participant here at the Ideas Festival. I'm going to spend just 1 minute sort of setting up why I personally am really excited to hear our three panelists, and then the kinds of questions we'll try to explore in the next while. I think something that's been striking to all of us in our different places of origin and walks of life and roles in life has been the way over the past decade, as a time when national level governance in the United States and various parts of Europe around the world has been having problems. There are log jams, there's dysfunction, there's polarization. Cities and mayors have more and more emerged as the places where things can get done. My wife Deb and I were here a year ago on this stage talking about our explorations in smaller town America, places much smaller than the ones we're going to be hearing about today. But I think also larger American cities and world cities have been setting a pattern of here are ways in which that a lot of the problems of economic advancement and finding ways to have practical moving forward problems can be addressed. We've often heard mayors of cities large and small describe their role as being the highest political office there is, because it's a place where you can actually get things done. Some mayors are running for other offices, but the office of mayor is an important one. But we also know that while cities are the locus of lots of solutions, they are also the locus of lots of problems. We have the problems of extreme prosperity in many cities. We have problems of public infrastructure of various sorts lagging behind. Every problem you can think of in the modern world, there is a city success story for it, and there's a city challenge story for it. And also we have the urban-rural divides and all the rest. To talk about dimensions of how cities are reinventing themselves, what is working, what is not, what things are replicatable across the country and the world, what things seem to be idiosyncratic, where different institutions have had successes, where they haven't, how the different players, national government, state government, city governments, NGOs, private corporations, how they all interact. We have a superb panel to lead our discussion of them. You'll know that many of them you know from past performances here and past life. Their full bios are in your book. Just to say a word, we have Latha Reddy to my immediate left, my immediate right, your left, who is the chair of the Prudential Foundation, former civil rights attorney, and the senior vice president for diversity, inclusion, and impact at the Prudential. We have Penny Pritzker, whom you all know from her time as Secretary of Commerce, and all her different philanthropic efforts now in Chicago and through the Council on Foreign Relations and other places where she's wielding her influence. And we have Kate Levin, the head of the arts program for Bloomberg Philanthropies and former longtime commissioner of cultural affairs for the city of New York. What I think is wonderful about these panelists, apart from their individual eminence, is the way that they collectively show the interaction of different institutions. They all are connected to certain cities, but as you'll see, they're cities and private corporations, cities and the federal government and the state government, cities and NGOs, and the ways these different areas of leverage come together. So we're going to hear one initial round from each of them about a particular city and particular initiatives they're developing there, things we may not know. I will lead a round of conversation for a while to get into some of these other themes of successes, failures, surprises, the road ahead, and then we'll have time for questions from the audience before we end at 12:50. So let me start, if I would, with Latha Reddy from Prudential, where the company has been based in Newark, right? Since its foundation, your work has ramifications around the world, your work and the company's work. But tell us, if you'd start with the Newark story. What should we know about what's happening in Newark? What would surprise us about Newark?
Sure. So thank you and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm going to describe Newark the way our beloved former city historian, Dr. Clement Price, described it. And he said, Newark wears the scars of Western democracy all across her face. It is tragically beautiful, complex, and proud. And I think that really sums up who Newark is. Just a quick history. It was founded in 1666 by Puritans, which makes it one of the oldest cities in America. If you fast forward, it rode the wave of the Industrial Revolution, and there were lots of industries that flourished in Newark, including leather tanneries and stagecoach manufacturing and breweries, and they flourished for decades. The growth was really fueled by immigrants from Ireland and Germany, and then the African-American population that migrated to Newark as well. And so that created some shared prosperity for a good long time. Then there was the eventual decline, right? The Great Depression and other factors that intervened. And I would say some of that had to do with government policy, right? The concentration of poverty in cities like Newark through the building of high-rise housing projects and the development of highways that cut right through the heart of neighborhoods and deteriorating schools and so on. And so those policies led to decades of decline and disinvestment. And then in Newark's case, there was the civil unrest of 1967. And so many people think that the unrest led to decades of disinvestment, but in fact, the unrest was the result of that disinvestment. And so that lasted for about 4 days. It was a tragic, part of the city's history, but 50 years later, we look back at the lessons learned and are trying to take that legacy forward into the future. And so following the unrest, the city elected its first African-American mayor, Kenneth Gibson, who recently passed away when he was well into his 90s. And he put in place a new power structure that better represented the population of the city, which was largely minority. And he was succeeded by 3 African-American mayors, Sharp James, Mayor, now Senator Cory Booker, and our current mayor, Ras Baraka, who are all very progressive and very pragmatic in their approach to growth in the city. And so I'm really pleased to say that Newark is definitely on the rise. And I should add an important part just quickly that Prudential was a part of that revolution, right? Prudential was founded in Newark, as Jim said, in 1875. So we've been there for over 140 years, and I'm proud to say that we are headquartered there to this day and fiercely proud of our commitment to our city.
And just one follow-up before turning to Penny. Was there a time in Prudential's history when the company thought, it's just not worth it, we're going to move to Texas, we're going to move to Los Angeles, we're going to move to the city?
There were definitely moments, but following the unrest, the leadership at the time made an affirmative decision to stay in the city and to take a leadership role in the revitalization of the city. Okay,
thank you. So now I would like to ask Penny Prisker, whom we all know of, certainly of your work when you were Secretary of Commerce, of trying to foster new manufacturing around the country, of having advanced manufacturing, having it be inclusive. A lot of your efforts now are back in Chicago. You have a private industry career, you have a national government career. Now a lot of your efforts are in Chicago. You have a prize that you've set up, you have this P33 initiative. Tell us what we should know about the reinvention of Chicago going on now.
So Chicago's in a really interesting place. When I got back from living in Washington, I came home to our hometown and was trying to understand what had changed and what was happening in Chicago. And one of the opportunities or challenges that became really obvious is that Chicago is punching below its weight as a tier 1 tech city. And I was meeting with some of our new tech entrepreneurs, and one of them said, I really think we need to address this challenge. So if you think about it, we put together an effort called P33, which I can explain more about. And the simple goal is to make Chicago a tier 1 tech hub. And this is a private sector-led effort. Today we have about 200 business leaders, incubator leaders, university leaders, venture capitalists, and other stakeholders who are active in this effort. So what's amazing about it is we posed the problem. We did a bunch of research. As Oscar Munoz said, who's the CEO of United, if you don't get the research right, then the prescription of what to do would be wrong. And so we spent a year with McKinsey, BCG, and Accenture researching ourselves and understanding why are we the number 3 largest city in the country and we're punching at kind of 7, 8, 9, 10 when it comes to technology? Why is it that we have world-class higher education, a highly connected hub in terms of transportation? 35 of the Fortune 500 companies have headquarters there. Strong diversity and inclusion in terms of the number 2 most immigration-friendly city in the country. 34% of our startups are women-led, which is highly unusual. And we have this vibrant startup ecosystem, but we're way punching below our weight. So we did a ton of research on ourselves and basically realized, and the other thing we did a survey of 1,200 tech leaders from around the country and devised a net promoter score for every tech hub in the country, including Chicago. And what we learned is basically the technology leaders around the country, first, they love where they're at, they love their homes best, but the differential between how they're viewed by others and how they view their own home cities was widest for Chicago. In other words, we're a proud people in Chicago. We think a lot of ourselves, but the truth is a lot of people around the country were not thinking so well of us when it came to technology. And so what to do about that has become the initiative of P33, and I'm happy to talk more about it.
And could you just say a word about the prize you've set up too, because that's very interesting.
Sure. Our foundation created a $10 million grant that is a prize to be awarded sometime next spring for a community activity, a community endeavor that is a physical space with programming that can create opportunity or change within one of our neighborhoods. If you look at Chicago, the physical geography of Chicago, our south and west sides are really falling way behind in terms of investment. There's about 4.7 times as much investment in white neighborhoods in Chicago as there are African American neighborhoods, and there's about 2.6 times as much investment in our Hispanic, in the white neighborhoods as there are in our Hispanic neighborhoods. So the prize is really a reverse concept. We're going to the community groups and saying, you come to us with your best idea. You come to us with your best concept of that's both a place and with programming that you think can change your neighborhood. And then we're going to have planning grants for the 4 finalists, and then ultimately there will be a selection of a winner of one of the grants. And our hope is that the planning grants will help these organizations actually create financeable business plans, is really the way I think about it. And then the hope is it won't just be our foundation, but hopefully others, either within Chicago or around the country, might fund the best ideas. We'll for sure fund one.
Great, thank you. So Kate, now to ask you, in your role at Bloomberg Philanthropies, you're operating every place, but you're also a person of New York City government. How should we think, what have you seen in the reinvention of cities in your arts programs, your Bloomberg programs that we should know about?
I think the biggest single opportunity for arts and culture to help in the reinvention of cities is because the arts are an aggregator. It is a sector that automatically combines public and private. It pulls in different kinds of audiences. One example, we've started a competition called the Public Art Challenge. So we give applicant cities up to $1 million for a temporary public art project that has to address a critical city issue. So in the first round of this, we did a project supporting work in the 3 upstate New York cities of Albany, Troy, and Schenectady, which are particularly bedeviled by vacant and abandoned housing, which is a problem for cities all over the US. And so this extraordinary group of artists got together, Adam Frelin and Barbara Nelson, and they designed a light intervention into abandoned buildings that pulsed at the rate of a heartbeat. So it looked as if these buildings were breathing light. The 3 cities had to collaborate for the first time ever, getting their land banks to talk to each other about which buildings to make available. Ended up being over 200 buildings across the cities. Activated all kinds of neighborhood associations, youth groups, very much activated the Black Lives Matter movement because many of these neighborhoods, poor, low income, racially segregated, and wanted to make sure that they were the leaders of visitation to their communities. And interestingly, helped reshape the way vacant and abandoned properties are distributed in those cities because prior to this intervention, distressed properties had been sold at an auction and you weren't allowed in. And what the art installation team found is that people would be waiting outside the pavement of every single building to say, what's it like in there? I might want to bid on it, but how much mold is there? So the particularly visionary mayor of Albany went to change the process so that now distressed properties are sold the way you'd sell any real estate. You get to tour it. And a whole piece was then activated in the finance sector around how do you help educate people about the kind of financial mechanisms they need to understand so that they don't buy a property, fail to renovate it, and just dump it back again on a city. So, a lot of context there. The art piece was stunning, but it was, it's kind of like the metaphor of the duck looks serene, what's going on beneath the water is a whole lot of churn. So that was an example of something that we thought was genuinely transformational. So it's this question of how do you use arts and cultural opportunities not only to make great and spectacular and transformative art, but to really plug into the various networks of a city and act towards transformation that way.
I have one quick follow-up for you, which is in a couple places where Deb and I have been recently. I'm thinking of Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Civic economic development officers have begun talking about the arts as more important than tax abatements or other things in attracting new business. Is that a trend you're seeing elsewhere?
Absolutely, and you want to take it as a compliment, and you try not to take it as an insult of like, why'd you take you guys so long? But I think the arts are an interesting phenomenon when you think about sort of civic infrastructure, because the experience of a work of art feels totally individual, and so it can often be hard to recognize as a collective kind of project for a city. What I have taken to saying is that you cannot predict the impact of art, but it's completely reliable. Whatever the form, we have enough evidence now in the United States, and certainly for centuries in Western Europe, that these kinds of activities, these kinds of associations, this kind of energy is nothing but positive, and positive in a way that can reach certain kinds of civic infrastructures that just aren't ameliorated by anything else.
Yep. So I have a specific question for each of you based on your provenance in coming here. My question for Latha is that one of the main surprises Deb and I have had recently in our travels is that the term public-private partnership, which is a term of derision, ridicule, and eye-rolling in DC, where it's just taken as meaning earmarks or something, that this is a real part of how cities redevelop themselves. How does your company view its responsibility in Newark, and why do you view that as your responsibility?
So it emanates from our purpose, our reason for being. We were founded to provide insurance to working families at a time when they were shut out of the insurance market because of prevailing prejudices. And so we talk about our purpose now as making lives better by solving the financial challenges of our changing world. So that's our North Star. Newark is our heart and soul, as I said, founded there, remained headquartered there. And there's so much opportunity and so much potential. It's an asset-rich city, and so that's what we see when we see Newark and we think about the potential and the story of Newark. We've been involved in so many ways in terms of public-private partnerships in particular. Ever since Mayor Gibson was elected, and with every mayor forward, we have sent loaned executives to City Hall to help stand up those administrations. We have done the same in Los Angeles, by the way, when Tom Bradley was first elected as mayor. But the reason being, we know we need a really strong government infrastructure, right, to support the growth that we need to see in the city. And so we've always had a very healthy working relationship with the city in so many ways. And they, in turn, recognize that they can't do it without the business community, and that so much of the redevelopment that's happening has been led by business. And so it's been a win-win in terms of that partnership.
And just one follow-up there. Do you feel yourself isolated or in the mainstream when it comes to major financial institutions like yours?
Well, we're unique in the sense that we're a global, Fortune 50 company headquartered in a city like Newark, and I can't think of one right now that would be comparable. So I think we are differentiated in that way, and we've learned so much from that. But I think there are others who are trying to behave similarly, right, and connect people in place and meet people where they are in a way that's really authentic.
Thank you. So Penny, my question for you is, you're in Chicago, which is feeling somewhat sorry for itself because it's not regarded as in the top 3 of tech, et cetera. But Chicago's problems in tech and other things don't get any sympathy from the likes of Fresno or Omaha or Jacksonville or much smaller cities. I have a question for you about scale. When you were Secretary of Commerce, you saw cities of all kinds of scale across the country. You're now in one of the major cities of the world. How many of the lessons and solutions you're trying to apply now in Chicago could be applied in cities of 500,000 or 100,000 or 50,000?
So let me, the process and the outcomes are absolutely comparable. Yeah. So for example, I would say Wichita informed Chicago as opposed to Chicago informing Wichita. And what do I mean by that? What we learned from Wichita in our research or Austin was, first of all, you need to come together as a private sector and be very purposeful if you want to address this challenge. So in Wichita, the challenge was they were the #1 aviation city, but they were losing jobs and losing their innovation. And they needed to create a center of innovation around a very narrow, around aviation. And they were able to bring the private sector and the research at Wichita State University, and then they created Wichita State Community College next door to support aviation. And now, if you're Boeing or you're Airbus or you're the engine makers or whomever, you must have a presence in Wichita. And in fact, the folks in Wichita will tell you that 1 in 5 jobs is an aviation job, and that it drives their economy. So now, how do you apply Wichita to Chicago, which is a much more diverse, as I said, 35 Fortune 500 corporation headquarters there. Part of our issue is we're not one economy. We're not one industry. We're almost $1 trillion economy, but we see our problem. So what we did, the lesson we took from Wichita was, we said, okay, we've got to study the clusters in Chicago where we have an authentic right to win. And what we did is we came up with business IT, 4 clusters. We think of managing information, business IT, industry 4.0, think of advanced manufacturing, advanced logistics, advanced materials, life and health sciences, so think drug discovery, biotech, medical tech. We have some of the best companies in the world in Baxter and Abbott and AbbVie in our midst, as well as Northwestern University Chicago. Food and ag tech. We are in the middle of the Midwest. Ag biotech, we should own ag biotech, and farming and production and process improvement as it relates to food. So and that's all basically, we said we have an authentic right to win in those 4 clusters. Each of those clusters are large enough to move the needle for Chicago, the same way aviation was large enough to move the needle for Wichita. And then we said, okay, what is P33 going to do? Again, taking a page from Wichita or Austin or Pittsburgh. In a funny way, we're learning from the smaller cities as opposed to them learning from us. No hubris on our part. We recognize our problem and we need to learn. And the 3 things that we're doing is driving cluster commercialization. So it's bringing that science together with those incubators, together with the venture capitalists, together with the large established companies to say, how do we make that ecosystem work in each of the 4 clusters? The second thing we're doing is we're really working hard on our inclusive workforce development. And I see some of my peers in this, whether it's Phyllis Lockett in the room or Juan Salgado, who have been involved in our education system and our community college system. But we're trying to retain our talent. We have we produce the #2 number of computer scientists in the country, and we're sending them to the coast. That's insane. And the second is we're trying to also grow our talent from all parts of our city. And the third thing is we have to tell our story. We need for everyone to understand we are a place of innovation. We do have centers and initiatives that make it realistic so for example, imagine if you took our research hubs, our strong math and computer science programs, our venture incubator assets, and our IT talent, and what if we brought them together to help large companies around applied computing so that large companies can reshape their operating models? That's the kind of visioning, and that's the kind of work that we're doing.
Thank you very much. So, Kate, my question for you is, you could think in gross terms of cities having problems of one extreme or the other. There are cities who have the problem of too little wealth, too few people, housing prices going down. I'm thinking of West Virginia. Charleston, West Virginia has half the population it did a generation ago. Erie, Pennsylvania is trying to, using refugees as a way to revive itself. On the other side, we have the cities like San Francisco or Seattle or Los Angeles or New York, where there is too much wealth, chasing too confined a space. And the question of how the wealth that's coming to the city is fairly shared and makes for a tide that lifts all boats. What has either your work in the arts or just your life as a New York City official taught you about the secrets, or at least some of the steps towards having more inclusive growth in these intense cities?
You know, it's interesting. People only in a limited way live in a city. They live in a neighborhood. And I think the really smart leadership around cities, the smart thinking around cities understands the value of local. It's not a one-size-fits-all program. You know, human beings don't behave the way theorists often wish them to do. So certainly, you know, what Mayor Bloomberg did in New York was emphasize a 5-borough strategy. New York is made of 5 discrete, separated by water chunks, and figure out what assets a given neighborhood has, and also, you know, what threats there are in a given neighborhood, whether it's too many vacant lots, or it's you know, businesses that are pernicious and lead to drug dealing. There are lots of basic behaviors that you can use to track what would make a positive difference. One of the things at Bloomberg Philanthropies we spend a lot of time trying to help cities on is just collecting data about themselves and trying to innovate based on that. So, for example, we're working with the city of Durham that has a high rate of post-incarcerated males who, because of their past criminalization, cannot get driver's licenses. And basically that condemns them to be unemployed, because the nature of Durham is that you got to have a car to get to a job. So what we're trying to work with the visionary mayor there on is, how do you address getting them through the system so they can get their driver's licenses back, and see if that is genuinely a key log to start changing certain kinds of behaviors. What's extraordinary about culture is it tends to exist organically in so many neighborhoods. And you know, sometimes it's organized institutionally, sometimes it's a craft-based economy that is willing to come together in certain kinds of ways to make a difference. But what I was struck by when I worked in New York was the number of local police captains who would come up to me and tell me how grateful they were that X organization was in their district, because when that organization was programming, the streets were safer, there was more traffic between whether it was the parking lot or the subway. And you could see this kind of impact. It didn't have to be a big name brand institution. So part of what we try and do in the arts program, and we work now with small and mid-sized cultural organizations in cities. Our current cohort is 7 different cities around the US, giving them funding to do what they do really well, but also giving them management training on the theory that a lot of the small guys are acts of passion by creative individuals who may not have had exposure to cutting edge business practices. But we do it in cohorts, in part because that forces attention up the scale to city leadership, so that they understand that this is a small business sector. It's a creative small business sector, but it is a small business sector and deserves to be nurtured, and has all kinds of rewards at the neighborhood basis for cities that are really struggling to figure out what can be catalytic, what can you build around.
Thank you. So Latha, a question for you about Newark again. Are the main obstacles for Newark the obvious ones of race and poverty, or is there something more and surprising beyond that? And what is the main help that Newark needs?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest obstacles is our history, and again the gaps that we're seeing, the racial gaps we're seeing, whether it's wealth or in health outcomes or other types of disparities, and so making sure that we bring a lens of racial equity to the work that we're doing, and that everybody around the table is looking at the same North Star around inclusive growth, but knowing that that means we have to look back to look forward. And so, happy to say that there is a coalition of the willing between the city and, again, the public-private actors who are thinking about it in that way. And we're fortunate that because we've kept our eye on the prize of making sure that everybody in Newark benefits from the upside of the investments that we're all making, we've been able to make adjustments along the way. And so Mayor Baraka in particular has talked about, again, we need to be progressive, but we need to be diligent, right? And so we built a Whole Foods in Newark, but at the same time we built a ShopRite in Newark, right? And there are farmers markets in Newark and CSAs. And so at the end of the day, it's about creating choices, right? Giving the residents of Newark agency over their own lives so that they can make the decisions that are best for themselves and for their families.
Thank you. So Penny, I have a question that's going to call again on your federal and local combined experience. You were talking about how you're learning from Wichita and Austin and other smaller places in the very large city of Chicago. Is the next stage of urban reinvention, do you think, mainly locally driven, or is there any reason to think the federal government can play either a positive? What's the federal government's role at the moment in helping you in Chicago or people in Wichita or people in Yakima, Washington deal with their challenges?
It's that at the moment that's challenging.
Yes, and how we define the moment.
Yeah, I mean, look, what I experienced were public-private partnerships that really helped move the needle. So for example, the effort called Manufacturing USA, 14 different institutes created around the country to promote advanced manufacturing. Those were, and the federal government would put up, maybe 30, 50, $70 million, and the private sector would match 3 to 1 on average to help get technologies like 3D printing or advanced materials or lightweight materials or advanced manufacturing from a concept and an idea to being actually commercialized. And frankly, 14 different cities around the country benefited. Pittsburgh, Detroit, Chicago got one, Youngstown, Ohio, and other places in the country. And every place that we went, what we found, and this is economic development in a more progressive fashion, in my opinion, because there aren't huge economic development dollars available. But the concept was that what I heard from local industry was we could never have coalesced this ourselves. It was the idea that, again, it was a competition to win something that we had an authentic right to win, where we could bring together all the various stakeholders locally to really take 3D printing to the next level, to over what they call the valley of death of innovation into regular production. And so that's, to me, really inspiring and something that is I'm not going to use the word easy, but is replicable in other areas in terms of economic development and creating opportunity. Yes, is it a process? Yes, does it take time? Yes, but at the end of the day, we did 14 of these, I think, in less than 4 years. And they live on in these communities far beyond the Obama administration. And they're assets that are extremely valuable and have led to then, I know that there's been factories built around, let's take Youngstown, Ohio. I know that there's been industrial companies created because of the advanced manufacturing work being done in Chicago. So they are real catalysts with real benefit. And so the idea that there is no role for the federal government is not right. Do I believe at the end of the day, local leadership matters a lot? Absolutely. Particularly, these projects also were meant to include workforce training. That is for sure local. Education, getting schools involved, getting the community colleges involved, making sure the certifications are in line with the opportunities being created. All of that is very local. So it's those partnerships, and they're really important.
Yeah. Just one follow-up. Does the so-called deep state within commerce or other parts of the federal government that you were helping create, does that persist, or has it all been extirpated?
Well, I'll tell you two stories. One is, I don't know what the deep state is, but I'll tell you, if there's a deep state, it's the 5 Nobel Prize winners that work at NIST. It's the people who have extraordinary expertise in protecting dual-use technology and making sure it's not going to the wrong countries. It's, there is just enormous expertise in the federal government that we don't really actually think about, right? The folks at NIST, they're the ones that make sure that standards are created, so actually this technology that I've got here is connected to those, all of those servers and things and amplifiers over there that are connected to the video machines. I mean, that's sort of basic work that we don't even really think about that goes on. It goes on for nanotechnology, it goes on for fire hydrants, it goes on for everything. We need government to do its job. The second story I will say is I was, my very last day, my husband's kind of a joker, and he booked us on a plane at noon, January 20th to leave Reagan Airport. And, when you're in the cabinet, they don't, it's like a pride in your security. You don't go through security because it's like an affront to your security service that you might be frisked or whatever. So anyway, but my term was done. I'm going through security like everybody else, shoes off, the whole thing. And the guy turns to me, one of the TSA guys, and he says to me, "Aren't you staying to drain the swamp?" And I said, "I think I'm the swamp they're trying to drain." But the deep state, you know what? I love that deep state. I'm not sure what it is, but I'll take our Nobel Prize winners.
Yeah.
I'll take our extraordinary military. I'll take the folks that, who do really tough work at the Department of, at DHS. I mean, that's hard work, to protect our borders.
The Weather Service, which was part of
Weather Service, the
your
Patent and
span.
Trademark
Yeah.
Office. The census. The census.
Yes, the census.
It's really important. It's important to every state. It's important. Constitution says we count everyone, whether you're a citizen or not. And that's the job we're supposed to do. That's the work that that we've been preparing for. And God only knows what will happen there.
Kate, one more question for you before we go to questions from the audience here. You have worked in the administration of, and you're based in America's first real superstar city. New York for a century plus has been, this global city. In recent decades, you could say that San Francisco and Seattle and Los Angeles are, becoming global cities of the kind that New York has been for a longer time. Are there lessons as you watch these other cities, aspiring to New York type status? Are they making mistakes you could warn them against? Which city you think is having the sanest path of sustainable, inclusive growth, and which one is heading for the guardrails?
I think so. Part of my job is working with something called Bloomberg Associates, which is a consulting firm Mike Bloomberg put together that advises cities for free. So I've gotten to see a lot of U.S. cities, a lot of international cities as well, and it's kind of a great question because I think the key to the city leaders and the cities in general that we see on a great trajectory are the great conveners. They don't think they know everything that they need to know. They are very comfortable in the world of the public-private partnership. I mean, one of the things that Mike always said in New York is that you shouldn't use public monies to do things that haven't been proven to work yet. That's where you want to harness your private sector and do that. I think there are a lot of city leaders that find it very difficult to deal with very confident and effective private sector citizens who are coming to tell them what to do. But great local leaders are those who can figure out how to harness the best of those ideas and make a credible argument on behalf of what city leadership does do, which is collect the best and most nuanced understanding of need in their communities. So I think a lot of it's about that, and a lot of it is very much about self-awareness. Mayor Adler in Austin has done a phenomenal job of being very open about the history of race in shaping that city and generations of city ordinances that literally did not allow for the creation of social infrastructure, pools, libraries, street beds, absolutely redlined by race. And so making an argument, he's in a very tough moment trying to figure out how to persuade people to do a bond issue to backfill that, because I think there is very much a strand of political discourse that's like, we're fine, that was then. But if there is no level playing field for neighborhood infrastructure, that gets very complicated. So extraordinary mayor who's just left office in Athens, Greece, did a spectacular job during a period of time, and this is something I think very few of us have had to be aware of, but through the height of the refugee migrant crisis in Europe several years ago, through the height of his nation's default several times, he managed to lead a city that was getting 5,000 immigrants a week at one point, no major public health crisis, no major sort of social uprising, if anything, figured out a couple of economic development plays to boost tourism in the city that was very much an arts-based strategy, to the point that Athens is now the #1 city break location for overnight stays in Western Europe. But it was very much this notion of how do you weave together the folks that are for you, how do you limit the damage, and it's often at a higher level of government. The city of Nashville is dealing, very much a blue city in a red state. And those are the kinds of skills that the issues are going to be different. But if you can package your problems, identify them clearly, and then figure out how to harness the best talent around them, and just keep pivoting based on how the problems actually present themselves, got a pretty good shot.
So if you have a question, please raise your hand and a microphone runner will come to you. Microphone runners go to whoever's the nearest person. Yes, and I think there are two. Yes, over here. Yes.
Hi. Just wondering what the thoughts of the three of you are on the New York City Amazon experience, lessons learned, and what do you think about the pushback we see in some communities to gentrification?
So, Kate, would you like to lead off on that?
Sure. NMP, not my problem. I was very happy. But I think that was an absolutely fascinating adventure in a number of conflicts between state and local government, coordination issues. But ultimately, it's a lesson in a lot of things that have been discussed in the course of this particular Ideas Festival, is how good corporate citizens understand their local responsibilities. I think a key irritant, and I do regret that New York City wasn't able to make that deal, because I think it would have been very much a continuation of a lot of things that we did under Mike Bloomberg's leadership, under Bob Steele's leadership in building up New York City as a potential tech hub. But all of those subsidies were only going to benefit that company, and there wasn't a lot of thought or nuance about public infrastructure like transportation, like schools, like local employment. And one of the trends that we're seeing in a lot of successful cities, like a place like Nashville, 90 people move there every day, but they are high-skilled workers. And so what you're seeing in a city like that is a lot of languishing of the local labor force. That was a genuine fear that people had about Amazon, and that deal was not structured to really pull apart some of those local issues. So I think there was a structural issue about corporate citizenship. There was a local politics of coordination issue. You don't leave your locals in the dark till the last minute and expect them to be happy about something like that. And but again, overall, I do think it was a lost opportunity.
So Penny or Latha, would you like to chime in or not? Would Newark have been happy?
Newark, we fought hard. We made the short list, and our mayor was very clear that he wanted it to happen. Yeah. And when they pulled out of New York, we made another run at it. But again, his approach was very pragmatic, that the benefit of the jobs that would come to the city and the place that the city is right now, the protections that are in place, would prevent and mitigate, the oversized impact that Amazon could have, presuming, as Kate said, that they came in with a certain orientation to corporate citizenship.
So microphone runner on this side of the room. Yes.
Thank you for an incredible panel. I'm surprised that we didn't, and thank you, Kate, for giving a nod to this, but I'm surprised that we didn't really talk about the real thing that's reinventing cities, not just in the United States, but all over the world, and that's immigration. And that's going to continue to be the case. I only know the numbers for Massachusetts where I've been studying them, but up to 1 in 5 citizens of a city are non-citizen residents. And in order to be a global city, you'll have to actually do what global cities do, like London or Amsterdam or Seoul or Santiago, which is to give non-citizen municipal voting rights. And so, and there are already 11 counties in the United States that do that. And in fact, before 1930, this was common practice all over the United States. Non-citizens were allowed to vote in municipal and in state elections. So where cities are leading right now in environment litigation, in even reproductive rights litigation, do you guys see cities leading in new kinds of citizenship in the United States?
And so I will volunteer an initial answer to that. I think one reason perhaps we didn't talk explicitly about immigration is we all assume it to be the fundamental reality and largely a beneficial reality to cities. But Penny, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that we need comprehensive immigration reform, and maybe the exercises that we're going through over these past couple of years, or frankly since 2013, will get our citizenry to a point where we're open-minded about it. But the shame is that we're losing a huge opportunity by not having immigration policy. We're losing an opportunity around, and I'll take it across the spectrum, our DACA kids, who are as American as my children are. And my husband and I put 300 of them through college. So far, we're 300, and they are persisting at a 72% graduation rate in 4 years. That is something like 6 times what the population of their income would be. So take that, immigration, all the way through to we're losing an opportunity for high-skilled workers to keep both the PhDs and master's students in STEM that we're training, but also the people who want to live here. And I'll give the example of Toronto. And Canada has a much more flexible and progressive immigration program. And as a result, Toronto is growing at 1% population a year. Now, I will tell you, Chicago would die for that. We are losing population. So we're making headway, we're making progress, even though we're losing population. And so immigration is a big part of economic prosperity, as well as a moral obligation that I think we as citizens need to insist our legislators address.
I think we may have time for one more question over here. If I will leave the choice of questioner to, yes, there you go.
Millennials have led the way in many cases to the reurbanization of U.S. cities. They will ultimately have children. They will need good K through 12 education. They cannot all afford private schools. I make the assumption that many of them will have to reverse the trend and move back to the suburbs. How will this impact the reurbanization of America? And we're not talking 10, 15, 20 years from now. We're talking now. And most of these cities have terrible public education systems. So what's the impact?
Latha, would you like to talk about Newark?
Sure, we certainly feel the sense of urgency because of everything you just said. And so, it's a both and strategy, right? Investments have to be comprehensive, integrated with multiple forms of capital to address all the issues that will, support that kind of influx of population, the population we need to see moving into the city. And so, Prudential, for example, is simultaneously making those kinds of investments in our education infrastructure. And by the way, in a whole portfolio of options, right? So public, private, independent, so that parents can make the best choices for their young people. At the same time, we're addressing public safety, which goes hand in hand with the education system as well, and also education and training and job creation.
And Penny, this is obviously a first-tier issue in the city of Chicago. What can you tell us from there?
Well, one of the things that Mayor Emanuel did, and I sat on the school board when we did this, we took a strike for a longer school day and a longer school year. And the positive impact on outcomes in the city, and Phil Slockett who's sitting here, could probably rattle this off, and I'm going to butcher it, but basically our graduation rates, I think, are up in the 70s, and our achievement rates and our ACT scores and all these things have been on the rise. But it was brutal. It was brutal. I will tell you personally, the implications for me, of people picketing and coming after for doing what is the right thing for kids and families, which is they need, more education and more access to better education. You're absolutely right. And with urbanization, we absolutely need to continue to invest in our education. I think the other thing we have to do is we've got to recognize we've got to use more technology in our education system. We cannot just expect this to be business as usual. We can't go with a 19th century system anymore. And so there's going to be, and one of the things I'm excited about is the universities are beginning to understand this and are beginning to put forward products that are, branded with the top universities to say, and to prove that our inner city kids can do the highest level university work through coursework online. And so we need to have a lot more innovation in addition to, longer school day, longer school year, and all of these other things.
So there's lots more to say on this topic and all topics, but there is no more time. Please join me in thanking our excellent panelists.